Hello, my name is Ed Lerner, and I am president of the Temple Emanu-El Men's Club and a member of the Board of Trustees. As part of the Elul project, I have been asked to share my thoughts on coping with suffering. The dictionary defines suffering as an experience of unpleasantness and aversion associated with the perception of harm or threat of harm in an individual. This is a pretty dry and clinical definition of something we all understand on a very basic level. Suffering elicits a primal emotional response in most of us, and to paraphrase a former Supreme Court justice, we know it when we see it. To me, suffering is an unfortunate but constant part of the human condition. I do not believe that suffering is some sort of God-driven punishment for bad behavior. In fact, I don't believe that God plays any role in human suffering at all. We humans do a great job all by ourselves in inflicting suffering on our world. But I think there are two different types of suffering. One type of suffering is nature-driven, such as disease, earthquakes, floods, tornadoes. The other is the more dangerous type, suffering driven by human behavior, such as violence, poverty, racism, hunger, and of course, the Holocaust. Both types of suffering, though, require a response. So how do we cope with these two types of suffering? By utilizing two other attributes of the human condition, empathy and action. Empathy allows us as individuals to relate to the pain of others and becomes the driving force for the next attribute, action. Action drives us to try to alleviate the pain of others as best we can and forces us to find a way to prevent the suffering from happening again. In the case of nature-driven suffering, empathy and action makes us look for new vaccines and treatments, build storm-resistant shelters, and put in place plans to help when disaster strikes. In the case of human-driven suffering, empathy and action forces us to confront and change our worst behaviors and take the measures needed to save those who suffer. From my own personal experience with suffering and tragedy, I have found that these same attributes, empathy and action, allowed me to cope with the illness and death of those I loved and to prevent myself from becoming blind to the suffering of others. Lashana Tova.